Hello and welcome to my second video. Now, in the first video we went over the assembly of this miniature in front of you, of which is a Primaris Lieutenant from the Indominus box set. It's from the 40k universe, for those of you that don't know, and today it's going to be quickly about my airbrush and how I like to base coat my miniatures. So without further ado, let's get to it. So here we have my airbrush. Now, I haven't been doing airbrushing for all that long, and in fact all I really use it for is base coating, then at all priming, which is kind of the second layer that goes on top of the base coat, and maybe a little bit of highlighting and shading, but nothing of detail as such. We'll go into more detail about the airbrush in a later video, but for the majority of users that need to know, this is a relatively simple piece of apparatus equipment that can be used relatively quickly and in confined space. Now, my desk area is massive. I've basically just made myself a little self-contained spray booth, make sure I wear a mask, as I advise you should do too, and spray away. Obviously, if you can help it, put yourself into a better ventilated area. It'll be better for your health and for those people who also live in the same household as yourself. Now, this is a Sparmax. I'm not particularly clued up on these things, but my model is SP35C. Now, basically what that stands for is typically the size of the needle at the front of the airbrush. The needle size varies typically from airbrush to airbrush, but for miniature related uses, anything from a 0.2 to a 4, maybe a 5, 0.5 will suffice. So if you're looking to buy one, that's the needle size you need to take into consideration. Now, the only downside to this particular airbrush that I have is the size of this. This is my gravity fed cup, which is where you put the paint in, which then gets gravity fed into the cylinder here and then blown out via the air. And obviously if you push down on the trigger, you get the air coming out, and then as you pull back more and more and more, the air then mixes in with the paint and that comes out of the front through the nozzle. Now, nothing more to it than that really. Simple apparatus, like I said before, and there are just a few other things that you need to take into consideration. When I'm priming, example, typically you should be able to get away with these primers that you see behind here. These are Vallejo primers. I like using two types of colours. I like the black, just standard black, and the Israeli sand. Now, the Israeli sand is kind of like an off grey colour as such, like a yellowy grey, and that's really good for giving highlights. So when I was talking about the zenithal priming, which we'll go on to another video, then that's an ideal thing, primer to spray on top of your main undercoat, which is typically the black one, in my opinion. Now, normally Vallejo are really good. When you come to spraying, you're going to have to firstly set up your airbrush, turn on your compressor, whatnot. I spray between 25 and 35 psi depending on how much detail I have to spray, or if I'm just doing priming, I just leave it at like 30, something like that. Now, they need a good shake, and you can do them directly into the gravity fed cup at the top of the airbrush, but I like to thin them down to get a thinner coat. It might mean that you have to give it like 10 minutes between coats, but I like to do 2 coats. It helps preserve the detail on the miniature. Now, to thin out the product, or that primer should I say, I use the Vallejo airbrush thinner. Self-explanatory really. You can use water and it'll do pretty much the same job, but I've got a bottle of this, so why not use it? Now, typically I'd put, say, 2 drops primer to 1 drop thinner, and that's it. Obviously you up those quantities depending on how much you have to spray. Before we go on to the actual spraying process on how to base coat your miniature, I'll just show you my compressor. And so here is my compressor. This is what I use to do all my airbrushing with. It's a relatively cheap compressor from Amazon. Now the model number is FD189, a brand called Fengida. I'll put a link in the description below. Now this is 2 settings, which is very important. There's a switch on the back side, which I'll show you now. Okay, can't zoom in much here, sorry. Well, the up position is a auto on off, which is ideal. Now the tank will get to I think 4 bar automatically and stop at 4 bar. Whilst you're using the compressor, the pressure will drop to just under 3 bar and then kick back in to fill the tank back up to 4 bar. Now this does not mean that you will be spraying at those particular pressures between 3 and 4 bar. That's just the pressure within the holding tank. This was my misunderstanding when I first purchased this. You can still use the regulator valve here on the front to adjust your PSI. I've got the hose running behind my desk here. See here, going up to my airbrush. Like I said before, I spray inside a little booth that I've made. Nothing special. The trick to airbrushing is to ensure that you get the mixture just right. You don't want the consistency to be too thick, otherwise you cause something called splatting, where if you get up close to the miniature and you start to spray, you get like a spider web sort of effect. I'll try and explain that to you in a moment. I've just given that bottle of primer a really good mix, and I'm just going to drop a few drops into the gravity cup. You can see there, maybe not, can't tell. The lighting in this box is really poor, sorry about that. Well, anyway, there's about 4 drops of neat primer. Now I'm going to add some of this thinner. You don't have to shake that. One, 2, 3. Can't tell. Say 4. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Now to mix this, the best way to do it is with an old brush, and put it down into the bottom of the pot and give it a good mix. You know, make sure it's all nice and uniform as best you can. Put it up the side of the pot. You'll notice if it's consistent enough, it'll flow easily down the side of the pot, which mine does. For now, that will do. Just leave my brush there on the side. I've got nowhere to put it at the moment, and I shall grab myself the miniature. Now we're going to spray him. Trick is to just keep a consistent flow. I like to do it in bits, stages, and I always point the nozzle away from the miniature when I start pressing in the air, just in case there's any paint left at the end of the nozzle that flies out. You don't want it to splat against your model. Okay. As you can see, it is a thin coat, almost looks grey. I only just used enough, probably I'd say, to get 1 coat. Bear in mind, I haven't turned him upside down or done any other spraying from the underside. I typically do that on my second pass, which I will do in just a moment. Right, so I'm back here for the second spray. I haven't given it much time, to be fair, no need. It's just going to be a quick spray, like I said. So, I started spraying away from the model, and I'm coming in to try and get the angles that I didn't get before from the underside. Sometimes leaving the miniature on the base can be problematic, because it would mean you struggle to get to certain areas of the model spraying from the underside because the base gets in the way. It's not too much of an issue because, as always, you can move it around whilst it's on your pot or your piece of cork, whatever you use. Because the paint's nice and thin, like I've thinned it down, it's not directly from the bottle, you can get up quite close. Just remember, keep the flow going, even if it's in short bursts like you can hear I'm doing here now, and you will get a nice uniform finish when it dries. So I'll put them down there. You probably didn't see much in all that, to be fair. Okay, just a little bit of a touch up there because I stupidly dropped him. That he's nice and black, a bit wet at the moment, obviously need time to dry. But you get the idea. I've done it from the underside as well. All you're looking for on a base coat is a nice even coverage where there's no grey bits showing. Yeah, and that's pretty much all you have to do when it comes to base coating. Obviously you need to clean out your airbrush afterwards and whatnot, but that's for another video when I touch on airbrushing in a little bit more detail. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Frantic Hobbyist. Until next time, bye.